So my talk today is titled Elaboration as Speculativeness in Mirandi Riwoe's The Fish Girl. And there you have the cover, right, of The Fish Girl when it was published as a single print volume back in 2017. So Mirandi Riwoe is perhaps best known for her 2020 novel Stone Sky Gold Mountain, which won the Queensland Literary Award for Fiction the same year and was on the shortlist for the Stella Prize in 2021. Now, in 2022, Riwoe published The Burnished Sun, a collection of short stories bookended by two previously published novellas, Anna the Javanese, which came out in 2019, and The Fish Girl, from 2017. Both novellas have female protagonists from what is today the Southeast Asian country of Indonesia, and they also first appeared as marginal figures connected to white European men. Anna the Javanese was a real person, and she was Paul Gauguin's model, maid, and mistress. Mina, the protagonist of The Fish Girl, first appeared as a nameless Malay girl in Somerset Maugham's story The Four Dutchmen. Now, back in 2023 at the ALS annual conference, I already gave a talk about Anna the Javanese. So today I'm going to focus on The Fish Girl and its protagonist, Mina. Mirandi Riwoe identifies as an Asian Australian author, and because her father is from Indonesia, she has said in an interview with Liminal magazine that she felt a personal connection to these two women, Anna and Mina, when she encountered them. But in the same interview, Riwoe also states that she wants her two novellas to be, quote, a kind of reckoning of what we are told by a specific cohort in history. And she also sees her fiction as, quote, giving voice to other possibilities or a recontextualization of what we know of these characters' experiences, rather than simply ventriloquizing or letting subalterns like Anna and Mina speak. And those are the quotations on the slide, at the bottom of the slide. I'm highlighting these comments by Riwoe about 1, a critical reckoning with history, and 2, not ventriloquizing characters, but rather envisioning possibilities and contexts. Because what Mirandi Riwoe seems to be after is something more than a retelling of a story from the viewpoint of a minor character, or what Jeremy Rosen calls the genre of minor character elaboration. Two famous examples of this genre of minor character elaboration are Jean Rhys's White Sargasso Sea, which is a retelling of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre from the viewpoint of Bertha Mason or Antoinette, and closer to our time, right? Think of Gregory Maguire's Wicked, a novel that presents itself as a biography of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, and which, of course, as you know, has been adapted into a musical and most recently a movie. While Riwoe's The Fish Girl could be read as an Asian-Australian White Sargasso Sea, I argue that this novella can be considered speculative fiction because of her invocation of an ocean goddess from Indonesian folklore and mythology, Nyai Loro Kidul. Right. Simply put, Mina, the protagonist of The Fish Girl, turns out to be a putri, a princess of the sea, and therefore closely linked to this Indonesian ocean goddess. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. So here is the outline of my talk. I will briefly highlight some key ideas from speculative fiction studies and talk about Jeremy Rosen's concept of minor character elaboration. I will also briefly touch on Somerset Maugham's story, The Four Dutchmen, which was the motivation for Riwoe's own novella. And finally, I will discuss some key passages from The Fish Girl itself. So, as my colleague Cheryl Vint observes, the term speculative fiction took off in the 1960s, growing out of the new wave of experimental, aesthetically complex, and socially engaged science fiction. As Marek Ozowicz points out, the term was also used by feminist authors challenging the masculine dominance of quote-unquote hard science fiction in the mid-20th century. Judith Merrill, for example, describes speculative fiction as, quote, contemporary writing which makes use of fantastic and inventive elements to comment on or speculate about society, humanity, and life, right? And speculative fiction is also a categorical space for postcolonial and minority authors whose work writes back against empire and the Western canon, but can also imagine possible futures. One famous example comes from Nalo Hopkinson, who co-edited the 2004 anthology So Long Been Dreaming. This is the first quotation on this slide. For Nalo Hopkinson, the speculative stories in this anthology critically reimagine the tropes of conventional Western science fiction. To quote Hopkinson, they take the meme of colonizing the natives and from the experience of the colonizee, or those who have been colonized, critique it, pervert it with anger, with humor, and also with love and respect for the genre of science fiction that makes it possible to think about new ways of doing things, end quote. Closer to Australia, we see similar sentiments expressed by Leah Jing McIntosh, who co-edited the 2020 anthology Collisions, Fictions of the Future, which features stories by Indigenous writers and writers of color. This is the second quotation on the bottom right of the slide. McIntosh's comments about the anthology's title, Collisions, dovetail with what Hopkinson says about reimagining rather than rejecting science fiction and speculative fiction. Quote, to exist in a non-white body is to collide against Eurocentric ideals, against narrow concepts of excellence, against stagnant ideas of the world to come. But collisions also manifest in the way our lives come into contact with others, how our pasts shift against the present, and how our imaginations sit against our realities. I now want to talk a bit about the genre of minor character elaboration, so sort of shifting gears from speculative fiction to minor character elaboration. In his book, Minor Characters Have Their Day, Jeremy Rosen defines this genre as, quote, the conversion of minor characters from canonical literary texts into the protagonists of new ones. When a minor character is converted to a protagonist, the character is meaningfully transformed and built into something new. The contemporary writer elaborates the minor character in the word's earliest sense, right? Basically adding labor, modifying the raw material of the character from the original text, building it up and recreating it from its initial instantiation. Although the most widely cited example of minor character elaboration is Jean Rhys's White Sargasso Sea, which has been held up as a feminist and anti-colonial text, Rosen cautions that this genre is not necessarily given to oppositional or subversive politics. Right. Rather, he argues, it props up liberal individualism with its message that we are all equally compelling individuals, all equally deserving of protagonist status. Coupled with its aura of literariness and inclusive politics, the genre is an appealing vehicle for the culture industry of the competitive literary marketplace. This is Rosen's argument. While I take Rosen's point that minor character elaboration is not necessarily subversive, I argue that in the hands of postcolonial and minority authors such as Mirandi Riwoe, the genre does more than shore up liberal individualism. Because there is another way to think about elaboration, one that Rosen does not engage with. In the section about the philosophy of praxis in his prison notebooks, Antonio Gramsci makes the famous remark that, quote, the starting point of critical elaboration is the consciousness of what one really is, and is knowing thyself as a product of the historical process to date, which has deposited in you an infinity of traces without leaving an inventory. So this is Gramsci's, the quotation on the slide. It is this sense of elaboration as self-critique and tracing how oneself has been shaped and produced by historical forces that I think Mirandi Riwoe herself gestures towards. Remember her comment that she is not giving voice to one minor character, but instead articulating other possibilities and alternative contexts that become visible and traceable because of the focus on this one minor character. My point here is that if we keep in mind Gramsci's idea of elaboration, Then minor character elaboration, the genre coined by Rosen, is not just a genre that recuperates or reinstates liberal individualism. Rather, it engages in speculation and extrapolation, which are two key features or methods of science fiction and speculative fiction, and it also points towards a larger social world within which the character is embedded. And in the world of Somerset Maugham's story, The Four Dutchmen, which was published in 1936, Mina, the protagonist of The Fish Girl, is not even given a name, and she only appears in the last 3 pages of the story. She is simply called a Malay girl, with whom the Dutch captain of a cargo ship has become infatuated. This Dutch captain dreams of buying himself a house on the hills in Java and marrying a pretty little Javanese because they were so small and so gentle and made no noise, right? He brings the nameless Malay girl aboard his ship, angering his 3 good friends and fellow officers who think that the captain was always losing his head over one brazen hussy after another. These are quotations from Maugham's novel, from Maugham's short story. In Maugham's story, this Malay girl is responsible for the end of the good fellowship that had obtained between the 4 Dutch sailors, who were the greatest of friends, like schoolboys together. So the captain catches the Malay girl in bed with his first officer and furiously shoots his first officer before shooting himself. The remaining 2 Dutchmen, the cargo officer and the engineer, either subdue or kill the Malay girl and toss her body overboard. Although the 2 sailors are charged with the murder of this girl, they are acquitted, and Maugham ends the story with this statement, quote, all through the East Indies, they knew that the supercargo, the cargo officer, and the chief engineer had executed justice on the trollop who had caused the death of the 2 men they loved, end quote. Now, it is clear that Riwoe is in dialogue with Maugham's 4 Dutchmen, because each of the Fish Girl's 4 chapters begins with an epigraph taken from Maugham's colonialist and Orientalist story. The 4 quotations that I'm showing on the slide are the epigraphs of the 4 chapters of Riwoe's novella. In Riwoe's retelling, the Malay girl is named Mina, the daughter of a fisherman and his wife, who is sold to the regional Dutch resident to work as a kitchen maid and household servant. Mina falls in love with a young man named Ajat, who is the village chief's son and also works at the Dutch resident's household. But their brief, torrid romance ends when Ajat returns to the village to get married. Mina also catches the eye of a Dutch sea captain, and this is where the events of Riwoe's novella start to converge with Maugham's story. The Dutch captain takes Mina on board his ship. Mina is assaulted by the first officer. The captain kills the first officer and then kills himself, and then Mina is bound with ropes and thrown overboard by the cargo officer and the engineer. So let me emphasize again that Riwoe is not just giving the Malay girl from Maugham's story a name and a voice. This is not simply a matter of making the subaltern speak. By elaborating Mina's character in the Gramscian sense, Riwoe is also speculating and extrapolating the circumstances that produce her tragic fate. And the first of these circumstances is the world of European colonialism, specifically that of the colonial Dutch East Indies. So I'm going to read this quotation on the slide. This is the beginning of the novella, the very beginning. In the darkness before dawn, the village men row out in their boats that are shaped like the half-pods from the criollo tree. And in the heat of the day, the women scale, clean, and smoke the fish that the men bring home. When Junius comes from town in search of cheap labor for the Dutch resident's kitchen, he calls out to the villagers in their Sunda dialect. So this is chapter 1. So the novella opens by presenting us with the life world of the Sundanese villagers. This is they are in a region of Western Java, right? The men go fishing out at sea, and the women are scaling and cleaning the fish for food and also for sale, to sell to the townsfolk. Junius, who is mentioned in the second sentence, is a half Malay, half Dutch head servant of the Dutch resident. His call to the villagers immediately reminds them and reminds us, the readers, of the Dutch colonial regime and the colonial economy. He's there, not for a social visit, but to actually hire somebody, hire cheap labor to work for the Dutch resident in town. We also learned that the Dutch residence house is in a town called Winkelsbaai. That's the Dutch name for what is today Palabuhan Ratu, which is which in Malay means harbor of the queen. This is important because there's a connection to the ocean queen or the ocean goddess Nyai Lorukidu later on. And this town is situated in Western Java, right along the Indian Ocean. So we are given a lot of historical as well as geographical specificity that was lacking in Mom's novel and that Mirandi Riwoe summons or evokes right here at the beginning of her novella. Another moment, right, of sort of limning or tracing out the colonial world happens in chapter 4 of the novella, when after the captain brings Mina aboard his ship. In his cabin, the captain shows Mina his collection of atlases. This is the last quotation on the slide. The captain shows her his collection of atlases, the colored lands that have been discovered and named, and those that are still waiting to have their mark placed upon them. So this quotation is almost self-explanatory. The Dutch sea captain is performing what Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak calls a worlding of the earth through his atlases. He's encouraging Mina to see the earth's geography through the colors and contours and the marks of European colonialism. Another important point I want to make is that regarding the individual subject and kind of the failure of this individual subject to be completely formed or to be formed right on flawed terms. So I'm going to read this passage from chapter 2 of the novella. The master, the Dutch resident, the master calls for Mina with the word mooi, which means beautiful in his language in Dutch. Mina catches a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her fingers trace her full bottom lip. She leans in close to the mirror so she can search out the flecks in her brown irises, the curl in her lashes. She smiles. So this is Mui. This is beautiful. Now, this is a classic, almost textbook example of subject formation and self-fashioning in literature. A character seeing herself in the mirror for the first time and realizing that is what she looks like. But what is important here, what I want to stress, is that Mina's moment of reflective self-fashioning happens on and in colonial terms, because Mina sees her reflection through the lens of the Dutch word mooi, beautiful, which is what the Dutch resident and the sea captain call her, right? They find her beautiful, so they call her mooi. The pleasure of Mina's smile at the end of the passage is not really Mina's own. It is derived from her master's and the captain's desire for Mui, for her beautiful self. Another instance I want to focus on happens again on chapter 4, after Mina has been brought by the captain onto his ship. The captain laughs when Mina eats with her hand. He gives her a heavy silver spoon and shows her how to dip its tapered end into the curry. The spoon is so large, she only covers a third of it with nasi goreng, with fried rice. And when she licks the rice from its surface, the silver leaves a metallic aftertaste in her mouth. And it should be obvious here that the Dutch sea captain is trying to civilize Mina, to get her to behave like a European woman by eating not with her hands but with utensils. But this moment of instruction is flawed and incomplete. The silver spoon is so heavy and large that Mina cannot eat comfortably with it. She only fills a third of it with rice. And when she is able to eat, the spoon leaves behind an unpleasant metallic taste. Finally, I want to talk about Mina's connection with the sea and Nyai Lorukidu, the ocean goddess from Indonesian folklore. I'll focus on these passages from chapter 1 that show us how closely Mina is tied to the sea and how her subject and self-fashioning is tied to the ocean rather than to a reflection or to a kind of comportment or behavior and etiquette. So I'll read the passage. It's in these closing moments of each night, when Mina feels the ocean's presence, that Mina remembers who she is. The memory has weight, sinks in her chest like a pebble in the sea. Her whole body gently rolls back and forth with the rhythm of the sea. The sea's roar, hollow, familiar, rushes through her, talks to her, matches its cadence to her. She can hear it whispering to her, Putri, princess, Putri. She backs out of the water and once on the beach again, drops into a low curtsy, murmurs her thanks to Nyai Lorukidu, the ocean goddess. Now, these quotations disclose the powerful connections between Mina, the ocean, and the ocean goddess from Indonesian folklore. The way Riwoe describes Mina's closeness to the sea suggests that she is not only immersing herself in the waters, she is literally becoming one or becoming one with or part of the ocean and vice versa, right? Her body rolls back and forth with the rhythm of the sea. The sea talks to her, rushes through her, matches its cadence to her. Also, this oneness between Mina and the sea is reinforced by how the sea calls her Putri, right, or princess in Malay, which implies that Mina is originally from the sea and perhaps even a child of the ocean goddess herself. I'm now going to turn to the conclusion of the novella, right? After Mina has been bound with ropes and thrown overboard by the cargo officer and the chief engineer, right? So Mina falls through the water as swiftly as a coin. Blackness smothers her, surrounds her in tiny bubbles. The blurred lights of the tramp waver and dim as she sinks. Putri. Her descent slows. Specks of seaweed and silt swirled around her head. Putri. Princess. The ocean queen whispers to her, wraps her warm arms around Mina's constricted body, loosens the folds. Niai Lorukidul promises her much, buoys her descent. Mina's limbs relax and the tramp is nothing but a glowing spot in the distance. The silken water draws Mina further down into nothingness, until she is finally back in the sunlight, scaling fish with her mother. So this is the end of the novella. Now, if we read this conclusion objectively or scientifically, what may be happening is that Mina is drowning, and her oxygen starved brain creates hallucinations of herself back in the village, back on land, with her mother in happier and sunnier times just before she dies. But because the novella has established very close connections between Mina and the ocean goddess, a speculative reading is equally valid here. Mina is rescued by Niai Lorukidul, who frees the girl from her ropes and that the sailors used to bind her, and magically transports Mina back in time to the beginning of the novella, where Mina and her mother, like all the other women in the village, are scaling and cleaning fish in the sunlight. Within the logic of the novella, this speculative reading gains further credence because of a few other details. Mina's nickname, spoken by her mother, is Tak Tak, which could possibly be a shortening of the Malay term Tapak Sulaiman, which means starfish, a creature of the sea. Mina is also afflicted by a scaly red rash on her thighs, which is a direct reference to the myth of Niai Lorukidul. So before she became the ocean goddess, Niai Lorukidul was once a princess cursed by a witch to suffer from painful red sores that erupted all over her body. Therefore, it is also likely that Mina is either a daughter of the ocean goddess, or possibly an avatar or an extension of Niai Lorukidul herself, whose divine powers finally emerge when she is completely engulfed by the sea. To read this ending speculatively, Mina is saved by or becomes the ocean goddess, is not to indulge in fanciful escapism, but to understand the fish girl as recontextualizing European colonialism in the East Indies within the larger framework of a supernatural world, one in which Nyai Lolo Kidul holds sway. While Dutch masters and ship captains rule the land and the ocean's surface, the tides and currents flowing beneath the waves are the domain of the ocean goddess, who was there long before Europeans arrived and who has also outlived their empires. As speculative fiction, The Fish Girl does not only recuperate a nameless Malay girl from the margins of Mom's Orientalist short story. It also offers a narrative of cultural endurance, resilience, and survival in the face of colonial repression, violence, and erasure. Mirandi Riwoe's novella helps us recognize that the elaboration of a minor character can go beyond the formation of an individual subject and shade into speculation and extrapolation, giving rise to other possibilities and alternative contexts in which our imaginations sit against our realities. Thank you.